Hello, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. I am Marwan Mahdi, the Emerging Technology Practice Leader for CDM Smith, and with me is Ben Ritchie, the Project Manager for the project on truck platooning that will be discussed shortly. CDM Smith has been leading and engaged with various opportunities with relations to emerging technologies nationwide and globally. We're looking at ways to take advantage of technology to support better investment decisions, better operations, and better planning. Today's conversation is going to focus on one of the key projects related to freight emerging technologies and focusing on truck platooning. The discussion will be centered around looking at truck platooning and its consideration when you're planning for it on a multi-state corridor. And this is focused on the Midwest region, starting with Ohio. With me doing the presentation is Ben Ritchie. Ben Ritchie is based in Columbus, Ohio. He is our client service leader for that state, and Ben has been very instrumental with the work related to Smart Columbus, as well as various deployment opportunities related to emerging technologies in the Midwest, nationwide and internationally. So with that, I turn it to you, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks, Marwan. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's presentation is going to be looking at truck platooning in regards to a deployment field project. This is a project that we conducted for Federal Highway, FHWA. Typical truck platooning field deployment project is in two phases. The first phase is planning. The second phase is the actual field deployment with data collection. Today's presentation is going to focus on the planning portion of the project. We recently completed this project. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to be talking about are the different aspects of this project, focusing on some of the major players, the host fleets, the tier one suppliers, the owners of the infrastructure like the state DOTs, and then other considerations going into the project. Next slide, please. So what is truck platooning? Basically, the concept for truck platooning is to have two trucks that operate as one. As shown on the slide here, the gaps between a non-truck platooning at the top are normal gaps given the regulations. The bottom picture is truck platooning, where wired communication is used to basically have the trucks operate as one. And in the projects that we have in the US, we are looking at a set of two, typically, that we've been deploying. And so these two trucks operate as one. So when the first one stops, milliseconds, the second one stops. When the first one pulls over from the right to the left lane, the second one will follow like that. So that's the fundamental purpose of truck platooning. And then the benefits are shown here. Fuel consumption is expected to improve. With that, we hope to have lower emissions related to that, as well as improved flow of the traffic because of these trucks operating as a unit, a single vehicle. Next slide, please. To better understand some of the information that's out there, University of Berkeley PATH program, the link here provides you with information and research that they've been doing. It also provides some information in regards to the programs that are going on at PATH as well as other programs around the country. Next slide, please. So in Europe, there are equivalent projects going on. The primary three are listed here in the chart. They're about a year ahead of us in regards to testing. The truck platooning projects that they have tend to be on the interstate system or equivalent in Europe, and tend to be multi-truck, in some cases 3 or more trucks in their experiments. Next slide, please. I'd like to show you a video from Bosch in Germany. This is an example of Bosch's truck platooning technology. You can tell the two tractor trailers. The first one's a single unit truck and the next one's a tractor trailer, European, are coupled together. And you can tell that the second one is closing in on the first in regards to distancing and turning the platooning technology on. In the States, the projects we're associated with are on the interstate, so we're not going to be having intersection type demos. And as you can tell, the technology is at highway speeds, posted highway speeds, and basically the technology keeps the trucks within a certain distance of each other. Here's an example of being the second driver, and in this case, the second driver is there for safety purposes, and you can tell the technology was kicked on and it cleaned up, and it closed the gap. So this is lateral control in regards to the first tractor. Please don't do this at home, but many of the cars that are coming on the market now have this lateral control in regards to staying in the lane. Tractors have the same technology that's being deployed. And I believe this is on a Bosch test facility in Germany. This technology will be deployed in both tractors. And here's a final look at the Platooning technology, again at the Bosch facilities. We thank Bosch for the video. So drilling down on the truck platooning project for Federal Highway, we are going to be supporting a 2-truck set platoon, and it's going to be multi-state. The purpose of this project is to do it in revenue service, which means real drivers hauling real freight for real customers for the host fleet. We're trying to emulate a normal situation as possible. We're going to operate on the interstate system only, and the partners for this project are the Ohio and Indiana DOTs. Working with these partners are critical. It's just for purposes of understanding the technology, for using their highways, working with their state police in regards to safety and and other enforcement issues related to this. So I can't compliment Ohio and Indiana DOT partnership. They've been very easy and straightforward to work with. Next slide, please. So who are the stakeholders for a project of this nature? I've talked a little bit about the host fleet, and in that we work with the safety director, we've got operations we work on, as well as the drivers. We'll help train the drivers, make sure that the fleet drivers are comfortable with this technology. I've talked about the state DOTs and law enforcement. It's critical to have these stakeholders involved and participating from the very beginning. Logistics customers, in the case of the host fleet, there's a shipper. We all have our customers. In this case, they're moving somebody's freight. So involving them is important. The travel public, this is where the state DOTs become important. And then their vendor community. In our case, it's Bosch as a tier 1 supplier, and our OEM is Navistar. Next slide, please. So let's drill down a little bit about a host fleet, working with the host fleet. So why would a host fleet care about this? It's mostly trying to understand the new technology coming on and how it impacts our operations. Truck platooning will not work in every host fleet. It depends on the operations, because fundamentally you've got 2 tractor trailers chasing each other. In some operations, that's just not the case. In others, it is the case, and that's where it makes sense. But with that, what we need to do for the host fleet is making sure safety directors satisfy, the drivers understand and are comfortable with this. Insurance issues have to be dealt with. So again, we're trying to put this technology in revenue service. The performance measures, the fleets are looking for information as it relates to changes in their operations. It could be improved fuel economy. It could be an impact on how they do warehousing when you've got 2 tractor trailers showing up at the same time, and on other efficiencies they may have. Because at the end of the day, they're going to make a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not to invest in this technology. And lastly, I talked about training, so very important to make sure the drivers are comfortable with this. Next slide, please. So then drilling down, what it is that we need out of our vendors. In this case, it's Bosch as a tier 1 and an OEM as Navistar. Basically what Bosch needs to do is have a road release technology. And in that, we are looking at level 2 truck platooning technology for this field deployment project. Next slide, please. So the considerations that Bosch will go through in regards to road ready, this is not unique, but this is something that Bosch and all tier technology vendors rely on, and that's making sure that the technology is road ready. And we'll go through a process like this, again, using Bosch procedures to get there. Next slide, please. So this is a very high level platooning functional diagram. So basically what this shows is the relationship between the driver and the technology, and that technology in regards to communicating between the two tractor trailers. And then the third part that this high level functional diagram provides is the data collection. The data collection is extremely important. Federal Highway is interested in operating data to look at that for safety analysis, for future regulations and understanding. Industry is interested in this information in regards to the performance of this technology and revenue service. So again, data is a very important part of this along with safety. Next slide, please. This gives you, we also are going to be looking at the driver, talking to the driver, understanding the driver, and using this technology. The top right of this slide gives you an idea for this particular technology as to what the driver will be looking at. And again, we will have a second driver. They will be there for safety purposes in the seat, ready to take control of the vehicle at any time. And with that, the second driver can deactivate the system at any time he or she feels uncomfortable with that. That's part of our safety protocols. Next slide, please. Performance measures. The project will have performance measures. They're going to be in various areas of safety, fuel use, and reliability. And this is in discussions, and part of what in the first phase, the planning phase, need to be determined, because the determinations on the performance measures need to be that the technology sitting on the truck for field deployment needs to be able to capture this data. And so this all goes into the planning phase of the project. Next slide, please. Public sector considerations. When you think about a new technology, such as truck platooning going in the field, and you don't have this technology operating today, things such as regulations, things such as vehicle markings, making law enforcement, training, aware of what's going on, public awareness, because we're going to be sharing the highway with current traffic that's out there. All these things are part of the planning project in the first phase and involve the public sector. And there are a lot of new ideas that need to be generated here, like enforcement. Having common enforcement across all states will be the ultimate goal. But for this one is having common enforcement and regulations, operating regulations for Indiana and Ohio. Next slide, please. The host fleet considerations. I'm not going to read this list, but at the end of the day, the host fleet really wants to understand what their drivers think of this technology. How does it impact the operations? What are the benefits versus the costs of this, including issues related to insurance? So sitting down with the host fleet, their assurance and coverage folks, their safety director are all part of the planning process that we go through. Next slide, please. So that concludes the PowerPoint presentation. I'd like to hand it back over to Marwan.
Thank you, Ben, for this presentation. We received a couple of questions that I wanted to bounce off of you. One of the first questions that we received is related to the pilot itself. And, you know, the question is centered around how did the DOT became aware of this opportunity, or how did this entire topic, if you will, of truck platooning became of interest to the DOT, and how are they able to successfully, get the funding to do the work and then, plan on deployment? Can you talk a little bit about some of the key elements the strategy, the objectives, the logic behind pursuing this kind of work and then doing it?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Thanks for the question. There are several buckets of funding available to state DOTs with interest in truck platooning deployment, field deployment projects. This particular project looked at a broad agency announcement from Federal Highway, specifically focused on truck platooning and Federal Highway's goal of having a first phase done and then the second phase of putting it in the field. So that's the project I'm talking about here. So that's one source of funding. Another source of funding for state DOTs is the US DOT technology grants. In particular, one related to the ATC-MTD grant or the ADS grant. We've worked with a state, Ohio, that had been mentioned before, and that's a source of funding for states to go after. That's an annual, the ATC-MTD is an annual grant out of US DOT per the authorization package that we're operating under. So there are sources of funds out there for state DOTs to participate in projects like this.
Okay. The other question that came to our attention is related to the data itself. The question is, obviously with truck platooning and the connectivity behind it, there's an opportunity to have access to a lot of information. Is this kind of information available to the public or to some parts of the public to use for research and analysis?
Yes, the answer is definitely yes. On the project that we're talking about here, we spent a lot of time with Federal Highway, not only understanding what the performance measures were, and which relates to the type of data we're going to gather, but also how we're going to gather that, what technology we're going to use, what's the format of that, and how does that relate to putting it in the field, who's going to gather that, how do we know it's being gathered properly? So yes. And I think at the end of the day, the database will be made available not only to Federal Highway, but also to the industry and to researchers. Details of that need to be worked out, but that's the goal of having this operating data.
Sounds good. And then, obviously when people talk about truck platooning, you're talking about trucks moving together, right? And so what if you have an instance where a car is trying to force itself between two trucks that are in a truck platoon? How does the system react to that?
The system's designed to basically disengage the truck platooning technology when a car merges between the two platooning tractor trailers. It operates the same way that if in your car you've got technology like an intelligent cruise control, where you've got that cruise control operating, and then when somebody cuts in front of you, your car automatically backs off because it has a certain built-in distance, safety distance that it wants to achieve. So you'll feel your car backing off. Even though the intelligent cruise control is on, it will back off to that safety distance. Same thing would happen here for both trucks, but between the trucks, it would just, it would disengage, and the second driver sitting in the seat would take control of the second tractor.
So, I'm assuming that, so per the question, I'm assuming that there has been some tests being done with truck platooning. From what you've seen, what you've came to find out or you've seen, etc., what has the driver feedback been on this technology? Is there a sense of whether they're on board? Are there some resistance? Any input that you could provide on that?
A couple points, data points on that. Federal Highway is conducting human factors research in regards to this very question. I don't think that information is available yet, but it will become available. Second is out of Europe. I had mentioned that they're a little bit ahead of us in regards to field tests. There's been information coming out of those European tests about how drivers view this technology. And with any technology, it's going to take getting used to, just like in your automobiles. But in general, the second driver, they get comfortable with the technology. And therefore, with that, it simply just becomes, like any technology, part of the driving job that they have. So, so far there hasn't been any major issues related to that. But again, that's the purpose of these projects, is to gather that information and to understand how the drivers feel about it.
Okay. And will the technology, I know we're still at the early stages, but has there been conversations about whether the technology will be compatible between different fleet providers? Has there been any discussions with them about that?
At the moment, these demonstration projects are with a single fleet, and therefore it's controlled within that single fleet and its operations through dispatch, however they want to operate it, because we're trying to introduce this technology into revenue service. Ultimately, the vendor community has talked about more cooperation between several fleets and the ability to communicate and basically get invited to a truck platoon system where you've got two different fleets platooning. There are a lot of business arrangements that have to be made, the sharing of fuel savings, whatever that case may be. But there's got to be business arrangements made. From a technology standpoint, that's probably not going to be the barrier. It's going to be more of making the business arrangements. But there are some vendors focused on this future state of operations.
And since our audience is mostly focusing on, Florida, do you have any recommendations should any of our attendees be interested in exploring, a pilot or, looking at solutions, freight operations solutions for the state related to truck platooning and the likes? Any recommendations for that on how to approach this topic?
For the Florida DOT or the Turnpike, there are opportunities in going after these US DOT technology grants in regards to a truck platooning project. Definitely, they're annual grants, and I think it's just organized going after those. With that, though, involving the stakeholders that I've mentioned in this presentation are going to be critical for organizing that. Getting a host fleet together, either having a specific vendor or having vendors that would be available, however you want to approach that. Having, and talking to the supply chain community in general about the technology, all of components of organizing going after these grants. But these grants are available, and however we could help, and share information about what we've done in the past, we'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, and then this is an interesting time because Florida is now set for pushing more truck platooning testing, and I can certainly see in a state like Florida where freight is an important component that looking at freight operations solutions through technology will be a high priority, especially that with the some of the input that we received from the webinar attendees is that parking, supply chains, manufacturing jobs as a result of COVID-19 are taking front and center with relations to freight operations. So looking at these technology solutions would be, one way to help improve and address mobility problems with freight in the state.
Yeah, agreed. And industry is always looking for new technology that will improve its operations, either by efficiency, reliability, or just simply reducing costs and improving safety. So yeah, any opportunity to invest in technology, they're constantly looking at that. So I agree with that.
Yeah. And let me see. I don't have any further questions at this point from the audience. I'm looking at my chat box. I'm looking at my messenger box. Is there anyone in the audience that's looking, have more questions to ask? Okay. Well, I think this concludes our conversation then. Brady, I'll turn it back to you